Hey everyone, this is Randy Kim from the Bánh Mì Chronicles Podcast, and I have been very excited to bring on this guest for quite some time. And this is a person I've been watching vicariously over the past few years because we have a number of mutual friends who have been involved in the activism work, specifically in the Asian American community and anti-racism and racial solidarity work. And so Tony DelaRosa is a father, he's a husband. He's an award-winning Filipino-American author, spoken word poet, educator, coach, and researcher. Um, Tony holds a background in Asian studies at the University of Cincinnati, a master's with a focus on art education and nonprofit management from Harvard University, and is currently pursuing his PhD in education leadership and policy analysis at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I will also say that Tony recently released his book, Teaching the Invisible Race, which is critically acclaimed. It has definitely been in the hands of like many educators, and and I want to bring Tony on because he brings a lot of light into the DEI, the anti-racism work, which has clearly been a hot button issue for the past few years. And first of all, welcome, Tony. I really appreciate you being here. And how are you holding up these days in the year of 2025 with only a mere few months left?
Oh my goodness. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be on this podcast, been listening to it. And I'm just like excited to bring, the K-12 lens to this space. How am I holding up? I mean, as a parent of two these kiddos, it's been a joy to watch. It's been also very just stressful and
Hmm.
heavy to know simultaneously that, I always say teach the word and teach the world, which I've learned as a critical educator. And, you know, right now, what's happening in Gaza, right? What's happening in Sudan, Congo, the Philippines, like all these, like being able to see everything, especially on social media, to reflect on how I'm raising my child,
Hmm.
to build a better world for kids, for themselves, not only for themselves, but their community. And knowing that other kids are not getting the opportunity is so critical for me right now. Just being able to raise them through an anti-racist lens, right? And also um, not to also be too heavy on them, to
Hmm.
balance it all every day, because yeah, parenting is a balancing act. As you can tell, I just jumped into my parent identity because that is like everything. I had like lack of sleep the last few days because kiddos are teething,
Mm.
which is a part of normal development. My baby Malaya, well, she's a toddler now, is teething. And then my son, he has like a little fever right now, going in and out of it. So there's just a lot at home. But I'm just happy because it is warm outside. I'm in Madison, Wisconsin, which is generally more progressive. And meaning like I can be myself. I'm not worried about I can be myself unapologetically. Um, there's a lot of white people here, right? But generally, Midwest niceness is kind of the ethos here. So, um, it's kind of like I enter the world here, and I ask for, I don't ask for permission. I ask for, I guess, like grace later on after I do the thing that I need to get done, right? Whether it's an
Hmm.
organizing act or an anti-racist teach-in or something like that, or a presentation. I always ask for grace later, even if people are not like ready for what I have to say. So, anyways, I'm generally feeling good. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that you point up um, your role as a father too. And actually, as a person who's not a parent, I'm always very curious to see what fellow parents are navigating with their kids, what they are seeing, because how we grew up is exponentially very different. I mean, in terms of access to technology, there was a time when technology was not in our faces 24/7 as it is now. So when you are talking to your kids, or actually what you're seeing from the public school lens, what are you actually seeing with um, how kids are consuming current events and whether it's like on through social media or through any any kind of digital format. I'm very curious to know how they are absorbing that and how do you as a parent navigate through that?
Yeah, so I can answer from a lens of parents. I can answer from a lens of um, what I'm seeing in education because I was a consultant and a coach. So from a parent, I know, my son is going to just transfer daycare to pre-K, right? And I had like written a poem recently about kind of his like moment when we were like reading a book, talking about Ariel, Little Mermaid, because Little Mermaid, he's gender expansive. So he was saying, I want to be a mermaid, I want to be like Ariel. And then, but then he would say, I'm not like the black Ariel. And I'm like, what do you mean? And then like they'll go spirals like, my heart rate kind of just my cortisol goes up. I'm like, what? What do you mean not the black Ariel? I have all these pro-black books. I'm an anti-racist educator, so you would think naturally that would filter down to my son and my kids.
Hmm.
But notions of anti-blackness is so insidious and so tricky to spot and where they are. And I'm like, so that's anti-blacks, but I don't teach him that. So where's it coming from? So from his school, where's it coming from? It's not just so other kids are saying it in his
Hmm.
classroom, cool, or I'm like, I don't like this teacher's skin because of X, Y, and Z, but I like this other person's skin. So they're talking about skin tones. And when I came down to it, when it came down to it, I realized that anti-blackness is so insidious and pro-white supremacy is so just like built in the system and so explicit that we have to try so hard to challenge those systems every day in order for them not to actually naturally get raised into an anti-black mindset, right? So
Hmm.
that's like from the children's perspective, and I haven't even barely talked to him about Palestine. I am talking about Palestine, like
Hmm.
how to usher that. He thinks it's very tragic and sad. I can tell that he has a lot of empathy in his head. Whenever I talk about like displacement, I'm learning about Hmong refugee status, right? And that's
Hmm.
part of my dissertation studies. So I have to read a lot of fugitive work from different scholars like Ma Vong, right? And Chindu Her. And I'm like, yeah, why? He's like, why do they not have a home? And
Hmm.
like trying to describe statelessness to him is really difficult. There's barely any books on that, you know what I mean? And
Hmm. Hmm.
resources. What he's getting from school is pretty much like the technical skills of get into kindergarten, right? He's not getting critically democratic skills or critically literate skills to navigate the world critically, right? So
Hmm.
I'm providing that. And then when I go into the K-12 system, because I was a former instructional coach in Miami-Dade, like I went all the way down to Homestead, which is like very far. Like a lot of Central American and Mexican American population, farmland area, and then all the way up to North Miami, and Central Miami. So it's such a huge drive and
Hmm.
huge distant demographic. And from one lens to the next, one space to the next, what is true is that people are struggling to understand. I mean, I already know since I'm looking at curriculum from different teachers, they're
Hmm.
not getting ethnic studies. No one's really teaching ethnic studies unless you are pro-black or pro-ethnic studies and took that in undergrad. Like we're really about
Hmm.
social, like in a
Hmm.
humanities course. You're not teaching that into your K-12 curriculum. You're not
Hmm.
altering it because what you're battling against is the speed of time, and it's really difficult to like take time out of your schedule, your busy schedule, your 9 to 5 as a teacher to change the curriculum and
Hmm.
plan because lesson planning takes a long time, and then calling parents, right?
Hmm.
And then making sure that kids get to school, making sure if kids are not there, checking in on them, and then grading, right? So it's the system is really against them. And
Hmm.
but basically what I'm saying. So I'm always looking for resources that kind of are able to supplement educators, have the easiest lift for them to bring critical pedagogy and knowledge into their work, right? I always try to find that
Hmm.
for people online, whether it's on like social media or from a colleague. I'm at UW-Madison, so it's a great school for curriculum and instruction. It's like I think number one ranked for that. And then for my son, I'm just telling myself every day I need to, for at least like the micro issue of my anti-blackness, extreme pro-whiteness, which he's seeing like his at one point he like, not to say this is a trivial thing, like he was liking Frozen, right?
Mhm,
Frozen, and the
mhm,
princess in Frozen is blonde, like, and
mhm,
then he likes Rapunzel, and Ariel, and I'm like, all these white princesses, right? Which is not a
mhm,
bad thing because princesses are awesome, like I
mhm,
love that about that. I'm glad that as a male, he wants to expand his gender identity and
mhm,
embody what a female, or let's not
mhm,
conflate with women, like practice gender, right? Practice gender in an expansive way.
mhm,
But to know that being surrounded by just feminist theory is not enough, and
mhm,
have to supplement with critical race theory, right, if you
mhm,
will, to actually bring it down to the level of pre-K,
mhm,
at the pre-K level, and knowing that if I don't do that, he will naturally be socialized to love whiteness.
mhm,
That's something that I'm always critical of, right? So from a parent lens and from a school lens, we have
mhm.
a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. Like we are racing against time, especially for those in the DEI work. And it's no coincidence, like in the 2024 election, that the young Gen Z voters have started to make that shift towards the Trumpism. And um, also it's no coincidence that the Republicans have made this a campaign to end DEI. So with that said, I wonder what have you observed from the Trump administration that has severely impacted DEI work and education across the US? And I mean, I don't know where to begin with that. I know that this is a very loaded
Where do we
question. Yeah.
begin? Yeah. Yeah, that's a very loaded question. It's
Hmm.
like, where do I begin? Where do I start? I think just like if you're asking me most recent,
Hmm.
because this has been ongoing, right? Like, um, even before Trump got elected, there was Republicans, conservatives, and Democrats, right, who were promoting very harmful content, right, to preserve whiteness, right,
Hmm.
because whiteness is a widespread across it is like agnostic in the sense that whiteness is everywhere, right? Whiteness is on both sides, if we use a colloquial political term. Um, but I would say during Trump, what got really elevated is very explicit, non-hidden versions, like saying the quiet thing loud, right? That the permissions I write in my book, like there's permissions being given to now act on your ideology of racism, right? Before there wasn't so much permission to act on it, but now, like part two of Trump, he's like explicitly like, oh, well, no accountability for me. Like I could do whatever I want. I can get convicted, and I could, I can swap my wand, and anything could happen, right?
Hmm.
And I can use money to protect me. Like that's kind of what we're dealing with in terms of the bottom up, and then on a tangible moment, Prager University, right, which is like a very conservative. Um, Education think tank
Hmm.
organization that kind of arose and now is scaling across the US to promote conservative ideals, right? To one lens, I saw something on social media that was teaching a lesson on slavery and how it wasn't that bad, right? Wow. You know what I'm saying? Like to even use that phrase to the simplest phrase, slavery wasn't that bad, or slavery was normal, normalizing
Hmm.
slavery as a normal thing, undoes it undoes so much work that a lot of my ancestors worked on, a lot of people I look up to, right? Womanist, queer feminist scholars have been working against, right, to just build this language, systems, and ideologies to combat and preserve one, their humanity, and combat a system that has been minoritizing them and harming them, right? So Prager University is an org, right? So they're producing curriculum, textbooks, right? It wants to be a university, right? It wants to promote its resources through P through 20, right? Not just for the K-12 scene, but through higher ed, right? And I've seen recently more more conservative political pundits saying like we need 50% of conservative staff and faculty at these institutions. Like for me, like I switched in 2022 to from a practitioner into the higher ed track because I wanted to archive and theorize critical Filipinx, critical Asian American studies work with education because that just that wasn't happening enough, right? I wrote my book Teaching the Invisible Race because I knew that in 2020 it was an intervention to the lack of Asian American representation, history, and perspectives in our curricula, right? You look at Soyun On's and Noreen Rodriguez's research, they look at standards, social study standards across curricula, and literally the only standards that come up are East Asian narratives, right? Japanese, Chinese policies, right? Sprinkle a little Filipino, sprinkle a little Vietnamese, sprinkle a little Korean, and everyone else goes aggregately Asian, right?
Mhm.
Which is harmful because if you aggregate all of us, then you don't target a lot of us, right? You target mostly East Asian folks.
Mhm.
And then mostly what happens is like this model minority narrative of Asian Americans, right? As opposed to like the resistance capital or resistance narratives that I'm looking for and I'm looking to teach my kids, right? So right now we got PragerU, as I said, we have like the attack on higher education institutions. We have the attack on ethnic studies. You know, out of
Mhm.
California, there's a bill that's trying to censor and like actually punish um, anyone who tries to teach about Palestine. Right?
Mhm.
Wow, you know that's backed by Zionist propaganda and Zionist policies, right? And Zionist policies are backed by both Democrats and Republicans. Is why I'm saying that's why I'm saying like um, it's not just a conservative thing, right? So
Mhm.
it's like where do we start, right? Where do we it's like which we can pick a plethora of issues right now. What I'm trying to focus on is ethnic studies, right? Ethnic studies in the Midwest, right? What I'm
Mhm.
trying to do is take local control, local because I don't have so much time and energy as much as a parent and as a scholar. Like I just don't have much time, right? So I got to be very strategic about how I spend my time. And I was talking to an organizer and poet and educator, Teresa Siagatonu, and she's out of Oakland. And, you know, there's this romanticism she would say about like, oh, everyone needs to just move and there's gonna be an exodus and move to the like these bastions of democratic or liberal thought, like the
Mhm.
Oakland Bay Area, or go back to New York and leave. I'm like, no, no, no. She
Mhm.
was like, you need to stay in a stronghold. If you feel strong and you have a connection, an organizing connection, a voice in the Midwest, stay there. She's like, you stay there. You built that. That's where
Mhm.
your voice is. I don't have power that like you do in the Midwest. And I'm like, you're absolutely correct. If I could become a professor that helps challenge these systems and promote equity, diversity, and
Mhm.
inclusion, but mostly what I'm really meaning is ethnic studies at all levels. If I could do that in the Midwest, I would love to stay here. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But knowing that my job, also the job market for higher education is very slim these days because there's attack on the entire market.
Mhm.
Um, I'm gonna take my energy wherever I can, right? But right
Mhm.
now, for now, I'm
Mhm.
doing it locally.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for really, taking us through this web of uncertainty that's going on that a lot of people are not even aware of because people think like the is just a simple, let's talk about diversity. I mean, this is complex, and I think that what you really share is very deep into like of why this history needs to be told and how it's being told and also trying to navigate the institutions and the systems that are in place that actually benefited from not having DEI. And so it's like it's basically trying to play which game is going to work. And I'm also like very curious about how other school districts and institutions in Democrat-run cities and states are looking to counter the anti-DEI work.
Um, so I'm looking for templates of like success templates of like K-12 districts, right? To see like, are there people who are like just on the offensive, right? Like, why are we always defending ourselves when we can? I would love to see leadership templates of who's disruptive in this work, right?
Mhm.
And honestly, I have a limited scope because I don't study district level work, but it's helpful for me that as a consultant and speaker because I generally partner with those districts, right? As a consultant, I'm like, that's how I survive as a business owner, as a small business owner. I'm like, well, I need to go to states that have very democratic ideals, very progressive ideas that still do DEI work, right? So Illinois is like somewhere I wanted to partner because especially they are the first place that passed like Asian American education
Hmm.
K-12 policy, right? With the Teach Act. But even with that, they're still being attacked by the the federal government,
Hmm.
right? Which they're still winning in many ways at the national level, but at the local level, I can't even tell you. I haven't done any research on it, like how implementation's happening. Is it impacted? I would say my business partners in New York, though, I run a program called the Asian American Teaching Empowerment Networking Initiative. It like basically supports and recruits Asian American male teachers in New York City public schools. Our budget is not impacted by any of this. And I asked why. They just were committed for a long period, for a long time. So, and it's New York, it's pretty
Hmm.
progressive. So, I mean, New York City, it's pretty progressive. So, I was like, thankfully, this is awesome. So some places are not impacted, which is cool to know.
Hmm.
Some
Hmm.
budgets from the micro level, some arms of the districts are not impacted. Maybe some others are, you know what I mean? But this
Hmm.
nonprofit NYC Menteach was not impacted in that way,
Hmm.
right? Hopefully this doesn't out them and they become a target via me talking about them on this podcast because I love the work that they do.
Hmm.
Um, but I would say that in terms of broadly what people are doing, they're changing their office language name, right? Like
Hmm.
equity and inclusion becomes the well-being and community office, right? They either change it into well-being spaces, which I've seen happen. Like
Hmm.
I have a lot of friends who are diversity, equity, inclusion officers. They don't have that name now as their role. They're the chief well-being officer, or what other districts are doing are just doubling down, right? Doubling down on the equity work. So I think, let me try to think. I'm trying to think of like a good template because I haven't heard much right now because even California, many districts in California are being attacked right now. And you would think
Hmm.
that it's a bastion in California, and I haven't really seen a district not get attacked, right? Like even San Francisco in particular, Unified School District, with its transition and superintendency. Like recently, I was called in to speak, like not speak, but like to mobilize resources, and I use my Instagram to amplify issues happening in the community pertaining to ethnic studies. And a lot of the leaders were asking me to put pressure by educating people and putting pressure on this new superintendent who happened to be Asian, right? To preserve ethnic studies because people were trying to, like Zionists
Hmm.
and conservatives were trying to like limit the amount of ethnic studies that was going to be implemented in the school district. Right now, it's like implemented, right? And it's like the heartland for ethnic studies in K-12 in higher education, right? That's where I was born in San Francisco. So I'm like, what? So I can't even tell you. I can't even say like what's their real strategy right now. I know
Hmm.
people are renaming and rebranding, right?
Hmm.
They're shifting resources, right? I know that at the higher ed level, um, they are doing layoffs, right?
Hmm.
And they are redistributing resources. And instead of having a central office, making sure their DEI values are just integrated, right? And I think
Hmm.
that's an important thing,
Hmm.
like equity of resource allocation. Um, if that's a strategy that you want to preserve, then you just do the thing. You don't have to name it equity resource allocation. You just have different groups that had
Hmm.
not the level of resources that they needed in the past, like the Black Student Union, for example,
Hmm.
get the resources they need to continue the programming. You know what I mean? Like that's
Hmm.
just one example.
Hmm.
Um, so people, do I have like the strategy?
Hmm.
Do I have the solution, the panacea to solve every district? No, because every district's
Hmm.
different.
Hmm.
Every time I go into a meeting, at least in my PhD program, all group meeting, the leaders are saying, oh, they start off the meeting with, "Ooh, we don't know what we're doing. We're trying our best to keep you updated. We're talking to as many equity forward people as possible to preserve what we're doing right now in the midst of attacks. And it's really difficult. So we appreciate your grace. And at the same time, we're not going to let you down, which I love. I love that they put a stake in the
Hmm.
ground and say, like, we're going to try our best to not let, um, whether it's to like hide, like rechange their name or whatever, they're trying to try to keep us afloat because they know that we need to get our work done out there, right?
Yeah.
They know that we deserve to continue producing equity work. So um, a lot of descriptions, but not a lot of specific answers for you. But it's a non-specific and a very abstract time. If that makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah, to also like make a slight pivot here, like as a queer Asian American, specifically Vietnamese and Cambodian, like I grew up in a predominantly white community, and which is very common for a lot of folks that Asian folks that did not live in the coastal cities, that lived in the Midwest and the South. And like for me, I did not know who Dr. Hanani K. Trask, Grace Lee Boggs, Fred Korematsu, or even Lapu Lapu until like I was in my 30s. And for context, I'm 42. And so
Yep.
like I had gone K through 12 without knowing any of my Asian American history. And if there was, it was basically like the Japanese in World War II and the Vietnam War. So we were seen as the villains in our story and nothing about the humanity of them. And I see how dangerous this is because, to deal with um like white students that absolutely took that narrative and ran with it, which allowed them to be pretty cruel. Um, I think this is what's really important is that, when we don't talk about the Chinese Exclusion Act or what happened to Vincent Chin or the European colonization that has done to destroy generations of people in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, um, I think like what do you see as the potential North Star in all of this? I think like I see the power of knowing this because the reason why I knew about these historical figures and these events is because of movement folks, people in the activist movement and in the digital community and who have been doing the groundwork, and that's the only way I've been able to know about it. So that also tells me that my fellow peers who are not as informed um unfortunately do not know that, and there are consequences to not knowing our history and what that leads to and what unconscious biases can do.
Yeah. What is our North Star? And you're asking like, what is our North Star with now people trying to um, having these resources more readily available.
Mhm.
Basically, is that what you're asking? Like,
Yes, yeah, let's
yeah,
talk, yeah, let's go with that part. Yeah.
yeah. I think like you know, since I study like the Asian American K-12 movement right now, which is a response to the rise of Stop Asian Hate, right?
Mhm.
It's like the movement has been kind of talked about. I call it in my dissertation post Stop Asian Hate when I always put like quote unquote marks because, Stop Asian Hate is the hate analysis, unit of analysis that is like an interpersonal like unit, right? If you just look at hate, then you're looking too narrowly at the issue, right? At the phenomenon, right? Because like you said, the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? Naturalization Act of 1790s, right? Like freaking Japanese incarceration, like all there's so much policy that underpins and that has impacted Asian diasporic peoples in America before 2020, right? So like um that's something I just want to know and say as we critique the Stop Asian hate. But the Stop Asian phenomena, I would say, put Asian American narratives on the map per se in the media, right? Made it accessible to a lot more people. For once, let's say lay people, white peers are asking, like when I go in a room and I ask them, have you heard about Stop Asian hate? And I get actually hands up, like when I do my talks in my book, that's one of the first questions I ask people. I'm like, have you ever heard about the Stop Asian Hate movement? And a lot of people are like, yes. And I'm like, wow, that's data for me. That's like a metric. And like,
Hmm.
that tells me that this phenomenon, communities who fought, right, to get
Hmm.
this stuff in the media, to get our histories out there, to say that they've been doing this for the last 20 plus years, are getting their time to shine, right? And then there's other people. Well, I'm going to talk about this time to shine part, and then there's people weaponizing it. Okay, let's
Hmm.
talk about the people. Let's like put some love on communities, right? First, because I
Hmm.
don't want to focus on the negative all the time. Put
Hmm.
some love on the communities, like Coalition for Children's Families, like CICF in New York, right? Vanessa Leung, I think she's Vietnamese American. I don't want to. don't quote me on that, but like she and her organization have been fighting for Asian American education curricular policy for like 20 plus years in New York City, right? And now they're getting spotlighted, which is great. I'm glad they are, but they should have way back,
Mm-hmm.
right? I would say that like a recent complex organization, I would say, is like the Asian American Foundation, TAF,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who has Zionist like underpin. I don't want to stay too long on this organization because there's so much more out there. But TAF, for example, the Asian American Foundation, I was voted the community trailblazer where they featured me on Hulu, like on a Hulu episode.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the complexity here is that I learned post after that video was filmed of me that their board chair was John Greenblatt, who's like the leader of the Zionist org Anti-Defamation League, right? ADL, which is not it's very anti-Palestinian and I would say anti-Asian American in that case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, I do want to shine light to the education arm because they are funding education initiatives for Asian American studies in K-12 and in higher ed. So meanwhile, ethnic studies and a lot of things are being attacked. They are funding a lot of the work to be done for Asian American to promote, to amplify, to bolster. So I've also received, I would ask like, okay, I'll do a talk at UConn, you Connecticut, right? And the professor that who hired me said, "Oh, the money that I'm paying you came from TAF." I'm like, "Oh, okay,
Mm-hmm.
this is interesting. I will take it." And just, I'm glad to keep that knowledge going because I understand that even within that group, at large, while I don't support it at large, there's some dope education work being had and research being promoted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then let's move to Asian American Advancing Justice, right? They are an org that I fully support, right? They are grassroots organizers, right? They advocate for policy. They advocate for policy change. They advocate for civic engagement. They advocate for education proliferation. So they are getting bolstered, right? People are shining the light to them as experts, as they should be. They help with the Teach Act in Illinois to get that off the ground, right? So that's cool to know that they're becoming a household name in the Asian American K-12 movement, right? They can go to them, the right people for resources, but they can also the drawback is that when people see any phenomenon, they see a phenomenon, they capitalize on it. So other organizations like TAF, for example, will capitalize on it and they say like,
Mm-hmm.
"Hey, come to us for the K-12 movement." You know what I mean? So
Right.
it becomes this battle of like orgs where I'm like,
Yeah.
we are not on the same page. And then
Yeah.
let's go all the way go back when I go to my lit review and I go to my work and I go back to like my ancestors who fought for ethnic studies, right, in the 1960s. The promise for Asian American studies came out of anti-imperialism,
Mm-hmm.
right? Came out of abolition, came
Mm-hmm.
out of community engaged work, came out of like self-determination, and it was definitely pro-Palestinian at that time, So it is really difficult to see the promise of ethnic studies and the promise for Asian American studies be co-opted and professionalized. Because when it
Mm-hmm.
goes through the professional process,
Mm-hmm.
it gets watered down
Mm-hmm.
into this neoliberal market. I
Mm-hmm.
say neoliberal to be very explicit about neoliberalism being a
Mm-hmm.
policy of privatization, let's say that in education, right? That's one arm of neoliberalism is that the liberal arm of the kind of laissez-faire approach to business, right, um, becomes this idea of like, okay, why don't we allow that and actually put the public good into a private good, right? And because that there's all these choices of movements, Asian American K-12 movement, and to me, I don't want to say there's all these choices. I want to say that these are false choices, right? There's definitely one that is trying to take the credit of the K-12 movement and brand itself and become the professional organizations, because there's not just one type of TAF out there. And there's ones that have been in the movement since the inception, not the inception of ethnic studies, but like embodies the promise of ethnic studies, embodies the promise of Asian American studies, right? So um, that's what I want to say about that right now.
Mm-hmm.
I talked about, so in summary, I talked about kind of like some orgs who deserve spotlight. I talked about some like complicated organizations, right? Like TAF. I talked about, and I don't, to be honest with you, let's put a spotlight to Florida. Florida passed. DeSantis, let's say DeSantis, passed Asian American K-12 policy.
Hmm.
That's a big question mark, right? There's like a lot of states that passing it. Wisconsin, where I live, passed it, right? I'm glad to be in this coalition because I know everyone in the coalition, for the most part, they embody an anti-racist lens. They embody the hope for ethnic studies, right? But in Florida, and I had work to do in Florida, you got a question. Why are you passing Asian American studies when you're banning AP African American studies, right? Like
Hmm.
when you're like harming LGBT studies and cutting their budgets, right?
Hmm.
Harming transgender folks, right? Um, that's something you have to question. So a lot of complexities that I feel like I'm trying to charge everyone to grapple with and not just take for face value, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I truly appreciate, bringing this complexity into this conversation because, as you and I have also been in the world of philanthropy, being nonprofit majors in our master's program, like foundations are a tough bunch to deal with because they do a lot of funding, but also where do they get their funding from? It's like
Questions, yeah.
and I think that's very important to know that a lot of that wealth was hoarded, over time. And I think that it creates like this dynamic because like funding becomes like what drives the policy, the direction that it goes under. And I'm really glad that you bring this up. I mean, I know we could spend like a lot of time on that and like breaking it down as to why certain foundations can be very detrimental to the movement of folks that have been doing this for decades and people that have been doing it and unfortunately passed away before they even seen any
See the
movement
fruits
from
of their
it.
labor. Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
exactly. And like when you look into the future in the next few months to the next few years, what are you looking at, and what does your focus look like? Because I know you've touched it up. I know you touched upon that, but I'm also like very curious to know, like, what does that look like for you as a role of an educator, as a person who does the research and, speaks on this work, for the next couple of years when there's constant threats. I mean, we're only like 8+ months into this administration.
Oh my goodness, I've been very vocal. So, for like pro-Palestinian voice,
Mhm.
right? Because I know that it's part of our promise for Asian American studies from inception, and I've been very vocal around everything around book bans, right? Like very to the promotion of democratic education, right? Anywhere ethnic studies is being attacked in some form, some way, I try to serve as a voice because I have a big platform now. A big enough platform for things to be shared a lot, right? So people will share work that I produce, which is great, and I'm fortunate and I'm glad the community helps do that. My work is like so I guess the way I'll answer this is like I'll talk about dissertation focus, right? Like I'll talk about how like I go from my book, I'm transitioning into my dissertation and where I think I'm going, right? So like my book was focused on the pedagogy, pro-Asian American pedagogy, which is grounded on like pro-blackness. Like how can I teach pro-Asian American studies in K-12 with a pro-black, pro-intersectional, pro-LGBT, pro-indigenous lens, right? And I think I accomplished that. I think I did that, right? And that was my practitioner side of like having 8+ years of experience in the classroom, instructional coach, coaching principals, being a consultant. So I have that lived experience. It's a very autoethnographic piece of work, citing some research. There's a little bit of research in there, but now that I'm becoming full-on researcher, like now I can critique my theories. Like that was published in 2023. Now I'm looking back and like, oh, my theory on Isang Bagsak, which is the Filipino theory, or no, not a theory, epistemology and concept around like one down and solidarity building from the anti-martial law movement in the Philippines in the 1970s is it not sufficient, right? And I want to bolster that with empirical evidence. I want to bolster that theory because I want my theories from the Filipino um, culture and history and embodiment to go down and get more accessible to the public. Because arguably, people look at Isang Baksak and like, what? What do you mean? They don't even know where to index it. And when I've taught it in the past, I've also been wrong. So this is why it's important to be in relationship and constantly community engaged because how theory is produced and how it's actually implemented and enacted, there could be two different things happening, right? The theory might not be practicing itself, right? The way it's practiced might be not the theory might be watered down, right? So they need to always be in conversation with each other. So this idea of practice, theory, action, and reflection actually get crystallized, and then all these theories and practice move forward together as opposed to diverging, right? I think that's what's happening. So
Hmm.
I, as a practitioner scholar, community engaged scholar, tries to do both at the same time. So my theory is backed by practice, right? And people get it, right, on the ground. Um, so there's that lens, and I'm moving my dissertations on Hmong or Moob. I
Hmm.
know that more critical scholars of Hmong refugee epistemologies and work use Moob, right, to be more inclusive. Capital H, capital M, OOB. That's another whole conversation we can have of this, but I'll use Moob, that form of it, for this conversation. I study that because the bill for my dissertation, Act 266 for Wisconsin, is mandating Asian American K-12 policy. So we talked about Florida, we talked about the national K-12 movement. Now I'm here in Wisconsin where the bill has been passed, and I'm trying to figure out my role in that, right? What I learned is when I came here to do implementation work. Um, I wanted people to implement this work because I knew that K-12 was just going to have an issue because everyone, for the most part, doesn't know where to start with Asian America,
Hmm.
let alone MOOB studies. Like
Hmm.
MOOB folks, so many of them, they reject the Asian American aggregate qualifier. That's why this
Hmm.
bill is called Hmong and Asian American Education Policy, as opposed
Hmm.
to just Asian American Education Policy, right? So there's this level of,
Hmm. Hmm.
so when Ma Zedong says secret history on the run, secrecy, fugitivity,
Hmm.
and Hmong refugee epistemologies, we have to be very critical around why Mu folks separated themselves from the Asian Americans because they feel invisibilized, right, in the Asian
Yeah,
American movement,
kind of
right?
like
So like
Pacific, yeah, like Pacific Islanders and Hawaiians in this conversation. Yeah.
Filipinos do that too. Filipinos reject, a lot of them reject the Asian
Hmm.
American qualifier. Some of them identify as Pacific Islanders. If you read like Latinos of Asia by sociologist Anthony D. Ocampo, he has like that's his whole premise is like Filipinos, at least in this site in California, identify as Latino of Asia, right? In some form, some way. And I'm like, yeah, they reject the Asian American classifier because they've been omitted or misrepresented or erased in Asian American movement building spaces, and I get that. So where I'm at now with my dissertation is trying to track the policy advocacy and the organizing that led up to the passage because what I know to be true was that one, Asian American education leadership, like when it comes to Asian Americans, Hmong folks, Moop folks in K-12 leadership, we're omitted. Like there's like this idea of the glass ceiling for regular folk, like at normal, that's a glass ceiling. There's just like you've reached the tipping point, like women can't get into like leadership, right?
Hmm.
Positions because we've reached the glass ceiling. But for Asian Americans, people have theorized the bamboo ceiling, right? And
Hmm.
I would argue that's true for policy advocacy and leadership and education because how many superintendents can you name that are Asian American? Moo, how many can you name that are principals? You know, there's such a small group in comparison to how many students and that identify as Moob or Asian American in Minnesota, in Wisconsin, right, in New York, in
Hmm.
California. And I even met like I think the first Moob, um, I think she identifies as Hmong superintendent, Misty Her, right? She's that's amazing, right? She is her ancestors' wildest dreams right now, right? To know that, but we need more of her in these spaces.
Hmm.
So right now, to uncover the policy advocacies, to learn about who was involved, who should we be positioning as leaders who are MOOB, who are Asian American, who fought for this policy. Wait, 20 years before, 10 years before, it's not just Governor Tony Evers signing a bill that says, oh, he decided to pass Asian American policy because people are talking about it. No, there's been organizing. There's been multiple policy conversations,
Hmm.
policy windows, and especially Hmong folks and Moot folks have been fighting for that for a long time.
Hmm.
I want to unearth those stories. I want to help amplify those stories so people can see these count. Is it a counter story? I was about to say counter story. Is it a counter story or is it the main story? You know what I mean? A lot of people would like to use counter story, but really to me, it's like the main story that's just been erased or omitted, right? So my job right now is a qualitative kind of oral historian right now. Um, and I look at policy, the policy cycle and organizing spaces to learn like who are the plugs essentially, who are the plugs to make this happen, right? Who is not being talked about, who who should I, what part of Wisconsin should I be going to visit to learn about their organizing, right? At what point in time was this like, did we get a lot of organizing, a lot of heat and energy around Asian American and MOOB education policy? It wasn't just the Stop Asian Hate movement, there's something before. And why don't we know that story? That's another good question.
Mhm.
Why don't we know that story? Was it because they self opted out? Were they trying to be fugitive and keeping this knowledge as secrecy? Right. As Ma Vong says in her book, for Hmong epistemologies, at least for the Secret War, there's some stories that Hmong folks didn't want to tell.
Mhm.
They decided not, they didn't, because it was too traumatic, or they didn't feel like the public deserved those stories to know. And I think that's powerful because
Mhm.
that's self-determination, right?
Mhm.
So where do I find that self-determination in the organizing and policy advocacy for the state of Wisconsin for Asian American diasporic people and Hmong folks? So that's where I'm going right now, which pushes me into this world of critical refugee studies, which pushes me into understanding, making all these connections to like what's happening in
Mhm.
Palestine, what's happening in Sudan, in the
Mhm.
Congo, right? Because before I used to be focused on such an American like site for analysis, but the more and more I get critical about how Asian America is both here and there, is transnational, just by its conception, right? Um, the more and more I try to make sure that when people are talking about Asian America, they mean this consciousness that goes back and forth between the motherland and here and
Mhm.
everywhere in between, if
Mhm.
that makes sense. Cool.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate this full lens that you're giving us too. And I know that as we start to wrap up right now, what advice would you give to fellow educators, K through 12, college, and parents that are really trying to resist this work? And also shout out to librarians as well, because they too are also taking
Yeah.
a huge hit with this. So what can you say to them as far as how to navigate this and what they need to hopefully be more optimistic about in this very challenging time.
I would say like, oh yeah, shout out to the librarians for sure. Like I, in particular, like my book, it's not big enough. I would say I think it should be because my book is counting invisibility of Asians, right? There shouldn't
Mhm.
be Asian invisibility, but librarians have been picking up the book and adopting it in their libraries. And I'm like, yes, that's cool. Teachers should have it readily available for free. This is cool. So shout out to the librarians, who are like constantly adopting books, like using their budgets for the right purposes, getting all the banned books, putting the and stocking their shelves, right?
Mhm.
Putting queer, trans, BIPOC imagery into the shelves for kids who identify as such to just soak up, right? Because I didn't have that option, right? To understand what is queerness, what is queerness for me, right? Gender expansiveness for me, right? And then for parents, and for parents, like they could honestly, they need to like with this idea of choice, right? This idea of choice, like they do have a choice. They have a choice to reinvest their capital, their time in supporting. I hate using BIPOC, but BIPOC is
Yeah,
like some of the terms right now
yeah.
for like anyone who's minoritized, racially minoritized. But let's just say minoritized peoples. Um, if buy their books. There's so many authors getting their work out there. Buy it, read it to your kids. Right? If you're an educator, let's talk about all the levels. Parents, right? Buy the children's books. You fill your libraries with that, right? Go to library, support the library, make it cyclical, right? Donate the books you already read, right? Once they age out to other folks, right? So they can grab them. And then for teachers, administrators, like please support like working with us, right? Work with people um, who are doing the fight loudly, right? Who are Palestinian, right? Who are anti-Zionist. They are. they're political. These are the templates we're learning from to maintain our sense of self-determination, right? And I know that's difficult because there's a lot of surveillance right now. And if you get surveilled, money can be taken away or you can be punished, right? So find your way. Um, I like the word fugitivity because Malvong's using it, and I know that other scholars use it as well. I don't want it to be some type of inaccessible term. Fugitivity is very much rooted in like Black radical traditions to teach, right? To teach kids when, especially when teaching and learning was taken away from them, right? During Jim Crow, right? During that era. And for Hmong and Mook folks, fugitivity is a lens of like understanding yourself in relation to this history that's on the run, right? This history is ever changing and ever shifting. Which knowledge can you keep secret? Which knowledge do you give out to people, right? Your fugitivity can mean you don't tell everyone that you're doing the work. You're just doing the work, right? You're just supporting us. You don't have to put it on social media and amplify it. If you feel like you're in a position that's going to put you that will cancel systems of equity work, then you don't need to amplify that. Just do it, right? You can change the name. You know, some people have been doing it. I hate that people are using it as a strategy for survival, but they have to for survival right now in these next 4 years. If you are changing the name to survive and have those like to continue supporting radical work or just humane work, like I don't even want to call it radical, it's just humanizing work,
Hmm.
right? Then keep doing it.
Yeah.
This is a moment where fugitivity is really important for survival, like especially for this any state supported agencies like the Department of Education. If you are in a state that especially like Florida and you're trying to get this work to your schools, just do it
Hmm.
and rename it if you need to rename it. Support and will people like myself, consultants, will be willing to support you also. Like you just need to reach out.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for naming fugitivity and for really, naming these important talking points and also like, just getting the pot going and seeing that there's nonlinear strategies to make this work. And I also want to say thank you so much for being on my show. I mean, gosh, like, being away for 2 years, I'm like, gosh, I started to like regret like this past couple months. I'm like, man, I would love to have Tony on my show because we're in like such a very critical point right now, and I'm so glad to be back. But also like bringing people like you along, showing us the blueprint of what you are doing and just passing that knowledge along. So really, thank you for doing that.
Oh, it's an honor to be on the show, and I'm grateful to this could have been a whole class that we co-teach together. You know what I mean? Like we were talking about org theory, fugitivity, Hmong, Asian American diaspora, ethnic studies. So there was a lot of hopefully people when they hear this, they get some bite-sized content that they can just take away and contextualize with their specific context. And that's the point of this podcast, right? To not get everything, but able to be full with something, right? To take something home.
Mhm. Thank you so much, and best of luck to your work, and also, be safe, and yeah, all the best to all the educators and librarians and who are doing the heavy lifting right now.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you.